Today's assessment objective: overwhelming force response. 5 cadets will engage one simultaneously. Cadet Mira Ashton will serve as the solo participant. They chose the human. The comment hadn't been malicious. Exactly. It had been the specific kind of thoughtless confidence that accumulates in communities where certain assumptions have never been genuinely tested. Mira Ashton had been at Coalition Defense Academy for 8 months. 8 months of performing adequately in coursework that was genuinely challenging, developing working relationships with cadets who were professionally courteous, if not particularly curious about her, and maintaining the kind of low-profile presence that came naturally to someone who'd grown up understanding that standing out in unfamiliar environments required more careful reading of the room than most of her cohort seemed to think was necessary. She hadn't been hiding. She'd been learning. There was a meaningful distinction. The 5 cadets selected as her opposing group represented a reasonable cross-section of the Academy's third-year combat roster. 2 Karvashi reptilians rated as the cohort's top physical combatants. A Velroni cadet with documented exceptional speed metrics, a Morati cadet whose tactical analysis scores were highest in the year group, and an Adrenic cadet whose species-specific physical attributes made them particularly effective in close engagement scenarios. Instructor Drithos had selected the group specifically. Later, several cadets in the observation tier would note that his expression during the selection process was considerably more neutral than the outcome seemed to warrant. The exercise began at the tone. The 5-cadet group approached with a specific coordinated formation that the Morati cadet had clearly designed. A pincer configuration that used the arena's circular geometry to compress engagement angles and eliminate effective defensive positioning. It was tactically sound. It was the kind of approach that worked reliably against opponents whose primary combat asset was individual capability within the space the formation left them. Mira moved before the formation had finished establishing itself. This was the detail that subsequent analysis of the arena's recording would return to repeatedly. She moved before, which meant she'd identified the formation's geometry while it was still being set up, calculated where its points of structural vulnerability would be when it completed, and initiated engagement at the precise moment when the formation was most committed to its shape and therefore least flexible in responding to something unexpected. The Karvashi cadet on the formation's right edge was the first point of engagement, not because they were the most dangerous, but because their position offered the geometry she needed to use the formation's own approach momentum against itself. What followed across the next 47 seconds was something the Academy's combat AI would spend 3 processing cycles attempting to categorize before producing a summary it flagged as requiring human review. Mira didn't fight the 5 cadets sequentially. She used each engagement to create conditions that shaped the next one, so that by the 4th contact, the cadet she engaged was reacting to positioning she'd established 3 moves earlier. The Morati cadet, whose tactical analysis scores were highest in the year group, recognized what was happening in real time and attempted to call adjustment commands to the remaining group members. The adjustment commands arrived approximately 1 decision cycle too late at each of the critical junctures. When the arena's tone sounded at 60 seconds, the floor looked the way it looked. The observation tier was very quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then the Velroni cadet, who was sitting upright in a yield position, lowered their raised hand, which was not technically required by arena protocol, but seemed like the appropriate gesture given the circumstances. Instructor Drithos stepped onto the arena floor and reviewed the medical drone's initial assessment readouts with the systematic attention of someone confirming that all participants would be functionally unharmed within standard recovery windows. Then he looked at Mira, who was flexing her gloved hands with a calm economy of someone performing routine post-exercise maintenance on her equipment. "Cadet Ashton," he said. "The assessment objective was survival for 60 seconds. "Understood," Mira said. The assessment did not specify the condition of the opposing group at the 60-second mark. "No," Mira agreed. "It didn't." Drithos was quiet for a moment in the particular way that experienced instructors are quiet when they're deciding how to document something that the standard forms don't quite cover. "The Morati cadet recognized your approach pattern in real time," he said. "Adjustment commands were issued." "They were," Mira said. The response window between their command and the relevant engagement was approximately 0.8 of a second. "I needed about half that." "You calculated that during the engagement?" "I calculated it during the formation setup," Mira said. I confirmed it during the first contact. The observation tier had shifted from quiet to a different quality of attention. The kind that fills when a room collectively realizes that what they've just watched requires them to revise several things they thought they understood. Drithos filed his assessment report the following morning. The summary section contained 3 lines that the Academy's department head would later quote at a faculty development session. Cadet Ashton performed the exercise objective with outcomes substantially exceeding the assessment parameters. Her engagement approach reflects combat philosophy developed under environmental pressure conditions that are not replicated by any current Academy curriculum. Recommend her training program be redesigned around challenge escalation rather than peer benchmarking. She is not operating on the same curve as her cohort. She is operating on a different curve that our measurement instruments were not built for. Mira read the assessment summary when it was formally shared with her. She noted the recommendation about redesign training and filed a polite request for the challenge escalation to begin the following week. It seemed like enough time to recover. The Karvashi cadet from the opposing group found her in the training facility 2 days later, which took some consideration on his part. His species' cultural framework around defeat was nuanced and not particularly oriented toward initiating conversation with the source of it. Your response window calculation, he said. 0.8 of a second. How did you establish that so early? Formation geometry, Mira said. I've been watching how your species establishes combat formation spacing for 8 months. The response window is consistent within about 0.1 of a second once I know the formation type. He absorbed this. You've been studying us, he said. I've been learning the room, Mira said. There's a distinction. The Karvashi cadet, whose name was Thrivak and who would go on to have an interesting military career partly because of the lesson in humility that this conversation provided, continued for another 20 minutes. He sat down across from her and asked a question that turned into several. Mira answered all of them. That was the distinction. Thrivak would later tell younger cadets that he had lost to Mira Ashton before the exercise even began. Not because she was stronger. Because while he had spent 8 months training for the Academy, she had spent 8 months learning everyone in it. The end. If you liked the story, please subscribe to our channel.